बॉलीवुड बिग बी अमिताभ बच्चन दिल के सुकून और अच्छाई की तलाश में कुरान पाक पढ़ने लगे। पूरी दुनिया के दिलों में घर करने वाले बॉलीवुड बिग बी अमिताभ बच्चन का दिल खुद बेचैन है। उन्हें सुकून दिल और हालात पुरअमन रखने के लिए किसी ने मशवरा दिया कि कुरान पाक पढ़ें। इस हदायत पर अमल करते हुए जब अमिताभ बच्चन ने कुरान पाक का मुताला शुरू किया तो हैरत अंगेज तौर पर उन्हें करार आया। बिग बी ने सोशल नेटवर्किंग वेबसाइट ट्विटर पर आयतों का तर्जुमा भी लिखा कि जो किस्मत में होता है मिलकर ही रहता है। मुल्क की बका और सलामती के लिए कुरान पाक पढ़ना एक अच्छा नुस्खा है और इसलिए इस पर अमल पैरा हूं।
The Quran is broken down into two sections. One is called Makkiyah, which means what was inspired to Muhammad, the Prophet of Islam, in Mecca. And one is called Madaniyah, what was inspired to the Prophet of Islam in Medina or Yathrib. In Mecca, you find much of the peaceful verses. Muhammad used to live with the Jewish community and the Christian community in peace and harmony. So there was many verses in the Quran that even the Muslims used to worship in the direction of prayer towards Jerusalem. They saw many elements of a unity between the Jewish and the Christian and the Muslim faith.
There are indeed some verses in the Quran that could be called peaceful and tolerant. Notably the injunction against compulsion in religion. Those verses almost invariably date back to the beginnings of Muhammad's prophetic career in his native city of Mecca, where he was powerless, where he was only beginning to attract followers.
Only few relatives and friends accepted the religion at that time, and he had many foes. So the revelations of that time were very peaceful.
Well, it all changes with the establishment of Muhammad's theocratic statelet in the city of Medina. He becomes a warlord, he becomes the head of a totalitarian state, he becomes very rich, very powerful, and very intolerant. And then many of these early verses, in fact, get abrogated.
In Surah 2, verse 106 of the Quran, it says, or Allah says, I should say, that if we abrogate, we being Allah, abrogate a verse, then we'll give you one that's better.
Whatever a verse, revelation, do we abrogate or cause to be forgotten, we bring a better one or similar to it. Know you not that Allah is able to do all things?
This is the basis, the foundation of the Quranic doctrine of nasikh, which is abrogation. And it is the idea that when there are verses that are contradictory or appear to be contradictory in the Quran, the one that is revealed later chronologically is better, as Allah has promised, and cancels the earlier one.
Now the violence started. Now you had to weigh between peaceful verses and non-peaceful verses. So the edict was that these were made null and void.
It is indeed a very curious concept for a non-Muslim to accept the notion that God may change his mind about a topic and may issue one injunction in AD 614 and then a very different one in AD 627. But this is indeed what has happened in Islam.
It's very important to understand that the Quran is not arranged chronologically. It's arranged simply on the basis of the longest chapter to the shortest.
And so you will find in the book itself some of these more tolerant verses at a later point in the book than the very intolerant ones advocating violence and subjugation of infidels. But that doesn't mean they came into being later on. Quite the contrary. If there is ever a contradiction between two injunctions, the ones that came later on in Medina are the ones that retain their validity, and the early ones from Mecca have been abrogated.
The peaceful verses became mansukha, means made null and void, with verses like the verses of the sword.
Traditional Islamic theology has it that the 9th chapter of the Quran, Surah 9, is the last revealed, in the career of the Prophet. And it is the only one that doesn't begin with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of Allah, the Compassionate, the Merciful. Some have said that that's because there's no compassion or mercy in this particular chapter, and that it is the Quran's last word on jihad, and in particular on how Muslims should behave toward unbelievers. In it is the celebrated verse of the sword.
And what does the verse of the sword say? It's very clear. That when the forbidden months are over, kill the people of the book wherever you find them. Lay siege for them, lay wait for them, lay ambush for them. Kill them wherever you find them.